Right. Morning, everyone. How are we doing? Um, my name's Al Turner. I'm Managing Director of 8PR and Marketing, but in this world, I am the writer of the Ibtm Global Trends Report, which was launched earlier in the show on Tuesday and will be being presented at 11:30 again in the Knowledge Theatre as well. As part of the Trends Report, what we've been looking to do is try and almost bring it to life through the Accelerate stage. Trends report's about 60 pages long, 20,000 words, but really all you needed to do is watch all of our sessions, and it's like watching the film of the book. So every single session over the last 2 days, and also for the rest of today, is bringing that all together. So before I talk about the next session, I'm just really chuffed that we've got so many people here on a Thursday morning, things like that. And do you mind if I do a selfie with you guys in the background? Do you mind? We're really chuffed about what we've done here this week. And you all have to sort of clap or something like that, if that's all right. And then I can put it on social media and show my mum. Right, everyone's got to clap. One more. There you go. It's a terrible picture, but I won't make you watch it again. Thank you. That meant a lot. Cheers. So first of all, this session, basically, we've been talking a lot about the first responsibility of an event organizer is to reach their audience. And sometimes those audiences don't like coming to events. Sometimes they don't like putting their hands up. Sometimes they don't like engaging. And actually, modern day event organizers, with the skills, the talents, the technologies that we have, can't use that as an excuse. So I'm absolutely delighted that we've got the guys from the Live Group, who are a really impressive business, event organizing business. They think really deeply, really analytically. They've got amazing data. They do events all over the world, and they're going to bring some of this to start understanding what the silent majority actually think. So unfortunately, because of what's going on, they can't be here in person. So what we've done is we've zoomed them in, and they're going to talk to you about it. So stick it out. It's a really interesting session from really interesting people, and I hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Al. What a lovely intro. As I kind of zoom out and see all your lovely faces in the crowd. Hello, everyone. Goodness, hope you're well. So thank you for that introduction from Al, and obviously thank you for the work that you've done on that report. If you've not read that report, please do check it out. It is a fabulous bit of work that's done. I'm going to be tackling a small part of it, as Al so succinctly put, in terms of this idea of a silent majority. And we have worked quite hard over the past years, probably, when we talk about collating the data, to understand what it is that an audience wants and what it is that potentially may be counterintuitive to how we approach events. What I'm going to present to you today is 5 of our key learnings, some things that we're using in terms of planning content going forward for the events that we run that we think everyone should know about, and things that are quite critical in terms of getting the most out of what we do in this wonderful world of events and everything that we do. And I think what I've seen happen over the previous 2 years certainly is an awful lot of people have learned an awful lot of things very quickly, and people are kind of the burdens that are placed on planners and the things they have to do and understand are ever more complex, and you guys all are having to do so much. So I have a fun little intro graphic, Probably should have just played that at the start, but there's us, there's Live Group. If you want to know more about us, you can check us online. Hopefully in the course of the next 27 minutes or so, you'll get a better idea of who we are and the work that we do. In terms of what's best to start off with, I think it's useful to define this idea of a silent majority. The reason for that being that it's very easy just to think of, oh, well, the data's telling us something. Well, it's not necessarily that. So we need to have this idea of what a silent majority is and why it's worth listening to them. And I want to take 2 extremes in terms of data sets to show where we are at as an industry and the events that we run and what is potentially accessible at our fingertips. And the first example I want to show you is what has come from what I would say is the extreme traditional event format. And so if we were to take an event of 1,000 people and we were to look at this very traditional format where we're talking no app being used, no digital tools, it's old school in the sense of if you want to ask a question, you've got a microphone. If we're doing post-event evaluation, we're using things like paper surveys and things like that. And diving into the legacy data at Live Group, which has kind of really been collated from 1990s to 2010, you find that of a given set, again, kind of extrapolating this out to 1,000 people, roughly 5 to 3% of that audience would get to ask a question. And so if you're a speaker talking to those people, you'd get a very small subset who'd ask a question, get a sense of what they're interested in and what they'd want to know. And if you did a post-event survey, again, if you were lucky, you'd maybe expect 10 to 5% of that 1,000 person audience to complete that survey. And so what you have is this large black hole of data when you're not learning anything because people aren't necessarily able to ask those questions or they're not willing to fill in a survey. And on these graphs, that's what the red is. It's this silent majority. Now, let's contrast that with where we're at right now. And obviously the landscape that we're looking at is currently still erring towards virtual, but is now extending into things like hybrid and others. And if you were to look at that subset, that data, you'd see that generally we would expect just over a third, about 30% of delegates to ask a question, to type in a question, whether they're in person or virtual. The barriers to that are so low, and they can just easily type something away, pop it in, and the speaker gets to see it. Even if that question isn't addressed, it's still an information point that a speaker gets to take forward. And because we're not just doing show of hands anymore, we have this new form of data open to us in terms of polls. And again, we expect now roughly about 75% of delegates watching to get involved in those polls, to share some of their information, to illuminate some of their learnings and the things that they want to know and understand. When we think about surveys, because we have different publishing routes, whether they are post-event, whether they're in the moment for post-session feedback, we're expanding that number to roughly 20% of delegates will complete post-event surveys and add to that greater data set. We have ways of accessing the social data, whereby not all delegates get involved on social media, roughly 10%, but that's a new data set that we can take away in terms of heuristic analysis of sentiment and how people feel and what they want to know. When we are looking at tracking data in physical-based locations for more the hybrid events and the traditional physical events, we're capturing about 50% of delegates within that data spread of, dwell times at exhibition stands, to analysis of phones, Wi-Fi signals to get an idea of capacities and things like that. That number is improving every day as these technologies mature. And then finally, which is the biggest kicker, is that because we are putting delegates in a digital environment first, whether that's through registration, even if they arrive physically, we get to the point that this online data set is essentially complete. And we're learning everything we can about people in terms of the behaviors that they show. Even if they're not volunteering that information, that's a data point that we can accept. And every single delegate that registers for an event, we're getting some learnings from them. And that completely changes the perspective in terms of giving a voice to the silent majority. The voice is there, even if they think they're sharing it or not. And so there's probably a way of doing this presentation where I just kind of I do very wonder what the learnings are, and ta-da, it's like a magic trick. I don't want to do that. I want to just dive into them. And I'm going to show you the learnings, the things that we're taking away. I'm going to point to an example of the data that is what is indicating this trend. So, I'm not just kind of making this up, and hopefully you can take some of your own learnings away and start applying them to your events. I think one of the big caveats I want to make before I dive into this is every audience is different. And one of my great rules of thumb is have no rules of thumb. I think they're dangerous. But these are macro level learnings that apply against a large enough subset of audiences that I think they're useful. And so let's start with the first learning. Really easy. You have 5 minutes to register people for your event. Seems maybe intuitive, maybe counterintuitive. Some people think they have more time to grab people's attention on forms. That isn't the case. And so what you see on this graph on the bottom is delegate interest over time. And essentially, this y-axis can be thought of as the potential chance for a delegate to answer an optional question. Like there are questions that we need to get from delegates wherever they're registering for event, who they are, name, email address, all the things that are kind of the required mandatories for any event. But the rich data, the useful data, the preference data is often optional. And that's really critical because obviously there's a great duty of care when it comes to privacy, and we only want the information that people are happy to volunteer. Now, at 5 minutes, people's propensity to answer those optional questions is hovering around about 80%. As that time expands, as those optional questions stack up, that drops lower. Now, provided that we give people an easy way of answering optionals, they're happy to do it, provided that our total registration time stays within that 5 minutes. And then you see this enormous steep drop-off after 10 minutes as people are just wondering why on earth it's taking them over 10 minutes to fill out a form. So in terms of designing your registration route, think about that very carefully. What information do you want to grab from your delegates? And what is the quickest and easiest way of grabbing that? Now, that may mean that you take slightly less profound data away from them. But if it's a choice of getting some data that is limited in its capacity, or getting no data even though you have great aspirations for it, always take the data you can get. And so think about that registration route, 5 minutes. There's an awful lot that we expect of delegates now in terms of, oh, have you uploaded a profile photo? Have you filled out your bio? Have you set your networking preferences? What are your dietary preferences if you're coming physically? We need to think quite carefully about the types of questions that we want to ask delegates, and therefore what they want to get out of it, and how we build our events around them. So 5 minutes. Second learning. This is a rather lovely scatter diagram. And so if you look along the x-axis, what you're seeing is a slightly heuristic analysis in terms of the choice that delegates are provided at an event. And what does choice mean in this instance? It is essentially an idea of the total content routes open to delegates. So if there's an event whereby the only method is that you attend in person, and the only way you can watch a speaker is by being in the room like you are now watching, versus are we doing pre-event webinars? Are we hosting content on a library in advance? Are we doing a digital route as well as a physical? Is there a hybrid route? Now, there are always a few outliers, and I want to talk about that very briefly. Now, the y-axis is event rating, total event rating normalized against a simple 5 stars. We don't tend to see ratings below 3 stars, which is a good thing. But as choice increases, you can see on that trend line of that axis that seemingly delegate views on the events improve. And so more choice is better, nice and simple things. Now, if you go back to the other end of the x-axis, you see there's like 2, maybe 3 events which are slight outliers in terms of it's a very minimal choice, but a very high rating. And looking at those events, they were more scripted launch events where it's like 90 minutes of high impact, emotional stirring content. And therefore, again, look at that rule of thumb point of view. But if you're running the more typical event, longer form content, where you have kind of set objectives that you really want to achieve, giving delegates that choice is quite critical. And that also comes true in terms of sessions. Speakers that offer delegates choice tend to receive higher ratings, and usually that choice comes in the form of interactive questions. It comes in the form of branching paths in terms of content within the PowerPoint and things like that. Choice is really critical, and it's kind of an intuitive thing when you think about it. No one likes feeling like they're boxed into a given way of doing things, and so when you're planning your event, think about how you can insert choice into it. And I guess the dirty secret is that choice is also sometimes an illusion. You can fake choice. You can offer delegates multiple routes to arrive at the same outcome. But the illusion of choice is just as effective as choice itself. Gamification is a double-edged sword. Third learning. Gamification is incredibly powerful, incentivizing people to do things and giving them a rational reason to do so, introducing games and fun and scoring and all these things have the potential to do incredibly well. However, they have the potential to turn off delegates just as much. Now, two really interesting data points for this. The three figures represent three different generations here. We have our boomers, we have our millennials, and we have our new zoomers. And when you look at events and sessions that weave in gamification quite heavily, you see the session ratings dip quite dramatically as you approach the zoomer delegate type. And at first, we found this a little bit counterintuitive. Well, hey, gamification is surely something that this delegate cohort as a generation should be interested in. You know, they're young, they're used to playing video games, they're used to having things scored on a point-by-point basis. Even tools like Instagram, TikTok, etc., have a gamified element in them. But when we dove a little bit deeper into it, we realized that actually that truth is a point of competition. That if you're a delegate used to gamification that's been very carefully thought out of in your day-to-day work, if you see it done haphazardly in an event or clumsily, you're going to react really negatively to that. And that's something you can also apply out to certain virtual events. We've all seen the kind of 3D world where you're getting to walk around a venue as if it's a nice 3D render, which is lovely. But that is contrasted against a multi-million-pound video game industry where people are seeing the very best content generation that has to offer there. And so do note that gamification has to be thought out, used minimally, but it can be effective, but can also turn off delegates. Now, the second kind of data point on this graph, we were gamifying elements of interaction with the website, whereby if you complete your profile, you get a certain number of points. If you watch a video, you get a certain number of points. And that was all going on a leaderboard. And what we found is when you do that, and this is across a number of events, you tend to see a graph like this red one, where you have a very small number of delegates who are responsible for an outrageous number of interactions and therefore get a huge number of points. And so on the surface, you're like, hey, this is brilliant. We're getting people engaged based on the gamified element. But when you actually look into it, you see that your total delegate numbers don't complete as many things because they're put off by the huge scores they see in the leaderboard. You have a number of people that are highly competitive, they want to steal all the points, and so they do so. And that can really turn people off in terms of them getting involved in the website. And so that's contrasted against the blue line against events with no gamification elements, where it's just, hey, if you want to complete this stuff, if you want. And you see there that not as many people complete things, but the total number of interactions taken across all delegates is more, there's more per delegate. Less people doing it total, but there's more information on each one of those individual delegates. And we don't want to bias things towards the top 1% or the top 2%. We want to speak to everyone. And so do bear this in mind. Gamification is a tool, hugely empowering, hugely effective, but has the potential to do just as much harm as good if it's not done right. I really hate number 4. It really frustrates me. And this is kind of the data point where counterintuitive stats become frustrating. I'm director of content at Live Group. My job is to build good content with clients. And it is rather frustrating to know that all of my hard work can be beaten out by a thumbnail. And so we've done a number of webinars here at Live Group, and you're seeing one of, on the left-hand side at the bottom, you're seeing this live from the green room webinar that we ran. And this was a graphic that was worked up by our design team. Hey, it looks nice. There's a picture of me. There's a picture of Laura O'Brien, our head of client services. And, it's pretty. And it got very few views. Got very few views on a number of platforms. If you look at YouTube, if you look at some of our internal marketing websites and things like that, there's just not many. But when we change that thumbnail, when we make it a bit more attractive, when we make it a bit more clickbaity, we get a huge increase. Now, this is obviously a trick that has been known to YouTube for a very long period of time. And you see the most successful YouTubers have an innate grasp of how to create the best thumbnails. But do not lose sight of that in planning an event. If it's true for YouTube, it is true for an event. And it makes you think about the way that you present your agenda, the way you present your speakers, the way you name your talks very differently. Listening to the silent majority is a lovely term, and it's a term that's based on trying to get people to listen to it. Think about how you present what you're doing just as much as the content that goes into it. And so, whereas initially I found this quite frustrating, what I've come to understand that what we must do is have a mix. The content that we put on must be excellent, but we must also ensure that we're presenting content in the right way. Do think about that quite carefully. Obviously, even when it comes down to hosts, the people that are shepherding people through your content, make sure that they're presenting things very effectively, that they're pumping it up, because that's what people respond to, and it works. And then the final of the 5 learnings for you is the difference between generations. It is getting greater, and I think it's greater than anyone has expected. And it's accelerating. And so taking the gap of boomers to zoomers, we're seeing across registrations, across interface with the event, whether it's virtual, coming in person, there's a 23% increase in terms of preponderance on mobile platforms, which means that when we're designing registration sites, we're thinking about the mobile experience just as much as the desktop one. Are we registering people in a way that's comfortable on mobile? So that's less typing, that's more button presses and things like that. Dwell time across pages is lower, so we have less time to grab attention, and that's content pages as well as total website pages. And it's looking like that information is also transitioning to the physical realm, where there's less dwell time, there's more movement, there's more need to grab attention strongly for a short period of time, then accept that it's going to go elsewhere. But that's countered against this idea of a greater preponderance towards networking tools, whether that's chat, video chat, whether that's in person, sitting down and talking. Hey, remember that? All of that seems to be aligned greater in the Zoomer mentality. I hate Zoomer as a term, but hey, it's one that's known. And I think this is only going to accelerate. And so the old models of events, in terms of the way we think about them, even though this is there's this idea floating out there of return to normal, or the new normal, whatever you want to call it, we have generational changes that exist within delegations that we need to keep in mind. And so those are the 5 learnings. Please take them away. Please apply them. Please start using them in the work that you do. And hopefully it's an open invitation to ask more of delegates, to question more, to try and understand more. And this is quite important to us. This initiative at Live Group, we call it Live Group Labs. It is essentially an idea of looking at all of the data that we have and try to put it to a good use in a way that's not invasive of people's privacy, in a way that builds better events. It is quite critical to us. I think we're at the point now where we know there's a lot more data that we need to grab. There's a lot more insights that we want to learn. For me personally, a big thing, I have an intuitive theory that more diverse speakers from wider backgrounds is more effective in terms of content, leads to better rated events. I don't have the data set yet to prove that. That's where the data seems to be going, but I need more data points to look at in order to say that succinctly and definitively. And I'm saying this as a white guy presenting to a room of people. That needs to change. And as we get more diverse speakers in, we begin to build up better data sets and better understandings. And so Live Group Labs is a continuous process where we are trying to learn more about the events that we do and understand that with this information, we can build better. And there's kind of an idea behind this on why this is important. Why do we care so much about data? And there's mercifully a rather simple way of explaining this. If you've not seen it, some of you may be familiar with this. This is the logo for the Cochrane collaboration. And the Cochrane collaboration is a website, it's an organization which puts together meta-analyses of medical data. And so if you want to know what migraine treatments are effective, you can go on this website and they'll show you a load of studies and they'll give you an idea of what migraine treatments are most important, most effective. Their logo is taken from one of the early days before we used steroids regularly for premature babies that were born. And there'd been a number of studies done on whether corticosteroids improved survivability for newborns who were born prematurely, but there wasn't a definitive answer. And it was only until the Cochrane collaboration put together a large-scale meta-analyses of all the studies that have been done that a greater degree of preponderance towards it helping premature babies was discovered. And in fact, that simple data analysis, that looking at a set of data and finding an insight from it, has probably saved the lives of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of babies. And it's so important to them that they put it on the logo. That's why this is important to me. Data can show us so much if we only take the time to look at it, to understand it. And as people that organize events, that put on events, our time is so limited, but it is so valuable when we start doing this. We are mercifully in the position where we don't often deal in life and death, but we can still make things better for the people that choose to come to our events. And so if you found this interesting, if you want to know more, we have 10 of these insights that we're publishing now, and we're gonna publish the other 5 very soon, probably in the new year. And if you're interested in that, please sign up for that report. There's a nice QR code. There is the URL there, and then you'll get that full report. We will also continue to publish because data held behind a barrier is not useful to anyone. And it is very important that we use this as an initiative to move the industry forward with evidence at our side. And so we're going to keep publishing things. We're going to keep doing talks like this, and hopefully people like yourselves will learn from them, will improve the industry as a whole. So if you are interested, I ask you, please sign up. Hopefully it's useful. And then finally, if you've heard me speak before, you know I do this, and I think it's very important. Mental health, very important to talk about. And times that we have right now are very chaotic and strange. If you are someone that has struggled with mental health and found it difficult to talk, please know that you don't suffer alone. There are people that can support, and there are always people that are ready to talk. No feeling is final. I always say that at the end because I do feel that it's important. And as we normalize it, mental health begins to improve for everyone. So I do hope you have found this interesting. I hope you've taken one thing away. If not 5, that'd be wonderful. And if you're interested, by all means, get in touch. Let's have a chat. I can talk about this stuff all day. But with that, I can hand nicely back over to Al.
Brilliant. A round of applause for Bruce. That was fantastic. Bruce, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Age-old microphone. If anyone's got a question for Bruce, we've got a few minutes left. By all means, while we have him, do use him. We're going to do age-old hands up rather than Slido because I'm not quite ready for that just yet. But has anyone got any questions that you'd like to ask? Well, we have. I mean, it was quite comprehensive. I'm not anticipating huge. No one? We all good? Is that all right? No, great. No, well, in which case, that's great. Thank you so much, Bruce. That just shows how comprehensive it was. All I'm going to leave with is, first of all, to say thank you to Bruce and the live group for some of this great work that they're doing. A few things sort of taking place a bit later on. Our next session is with CVent, who are also looking at the future of events in a slightly different way as well. Not quite as analytical like the live group do, but they're looking at it in a very different way, which is well worth your time. If you're looking at this, if you're interested in this, you'll be interested in them, which will be really good. There's a session this afternoon, which was if you were hoping to learn how to look after the England football team. Unfortunately, our speaker can't make it out for the reasons. But what we've got is a really interesting session instead, who's going to be run by my colleague Robert Dunsmore, who did an amazing session on the hoof yesterday. But he's promising one key trends, 3 key findings, and a really, really interesting session about how content is put together. It's a staccato fast session. Not only is it an interesting session, it's an interesting way of doing a talk. So it'd be really good if you wanted to watch the England football side. I'm afraid not, but this could be a really, really good one instead. And then at the end of the afternoon, around 2 o'clock, I'll be doing a speech on empathetic marketing. So again, if you're interested in marketing side of events, I'll be doing that a bit later on. So do come back. It's a continual journey. This can just be your starter, and if you're full, that's absolutely fine. But you might want to move on to a main course and a dessert, and maybe a little bit more afterwards. But look, thanks so much for your time. Thanks once again to Bruce at the Rive Group, and I submit you to have fun in Ibtm again. Have a good day.